honor and pleasure of introducing Mr. T.M.Krishna this morning for us. So thank you first to Indian Americans Forum and Indian American Muslim Council for partnering with Hindus for Human Rights in organizing this webinar. And thank you to everyone who is attending from many corners of the world. I'm so proud to say that not only is Krishna ji a leader in Chennai, which is my hometown, he's also an advisory board member of Hindus for Human Rights, our organization, one of the organizers of the webinar. So thank you for all the ways in which you make me proud and give me hope, Krishna ji. As a person born in Chennai and for whom Chennai is hometown, I'm particularly grateful for the work you're doing because I know that Chennai can be very conservative and resistant to change. And Krishna ji is at the forefront of the fight in Chennai against caste, Hindutva, and these days, CAA and RC. I first met Mr. T.M.Krishna in Central Park, New York, when he was kind enough to meet me and hear me out about this question that really is the burning question in my life right now, which is how can people who are Hindu by birth or faith participate in these movements against caste and Hindutva? And how can the movements be successful if Hindus are not present? So we had an amazing conversation about these questions. And around the same time, a Hindu temple in Washington, D.C. had uninvited Krishna ji because of the backlash to his composing Carnatic songs about Allah and Jesus. And this was his creative response to Hindutva bigotry. And I was helped in a small way in the swift efforts to find a new DC location for that particular concert. And then a board member of Sadhana, which is a sister organization of Hindus for Human Rights, Nikhil Mandala Party, organized a concert at University of Chicago. I drove to Chicago for that concert, and I am still mesmerized till today thinking about it. That concert was music as resistance, through and through from start to finish. From the song about women having control over their sexuality, to the songs that Krishna ji had learned from the transgender Jogappa community of musicians, and then compositions based on Perumal Murugan's words, and then indeed some Carnatic songs about Krishna and Allah. It was unforgettable. I was then lucky enough a couple of years ago to be at one of the festivals that Krishna ji organizes along with another brilliant activist and a friend, Nityanand Jayaraman, in Besant Nagar on the beach. I was there with my upper caste, middle class family whom I love, but who don't give much thought to these issues of justice and inclusion. But because it was a beautiful summer evening on the beach, and because there were political bands like Casteless Collective, accompanied by film stars, pop musicians, and classical performances, my family settled into the evening and enjoyed it, even though they were among Chennai elites that we don't usually associate with, and fisher folk community of that part of Besant Nagar. This was a new experience for my family, and honestly, Krishna ji is truly breaking barriers to arts and culture in both directions, and I think it's the most important work being done. Krishna ji is constantly uninvited and attacked. He is the target of ire and trolls from the right wing, as well as the entrenched music establishment, but nothing stops him. He keeps plugging away. He must not sleep much, because apart from his activism and his music, he has also written several books. I'm reading his latest book, Sebastian and Sons, right now. Here it is. I highly recommend it. It's about the mridangam and the Dalit Christian communities who have traditionally made this percussion instrument. What is most beautiful about Krishna ji is that he is humble and open about the fact that he is learning as he goes. I
didn't know that. I never knew that thing about me. Thanks for that information.
Believe it. I welcome Mr. T.M.Krishna to speak to us about music as resistance, and we too will join him on his journey and learn as we go. Thank you for being with us today, Krishnaji. And a reminder to all of you to type your questions and comments for Krishnaji in the chat area and mute yourself. Thank you. Welcome, Krishnaji. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me with during these very difficult times. I hope all of you are safe and at home, first of all. Before we get into this, let me just tell you about what's happening here. I'm sure you're reading the news. Things are pretty chaotic in this part of the world, like every other part of the world. To say that this is a humanitarian crisis in India is an understatement. The truth is, it's completely vague. It's so crazy. We really don't know the extent of the problem we are facing as far as COVID goes. We don't know where it's gone, how it's gone. And then you have these huge number of people trying to move from place to place. It's not just a Delhi-centric thing. Let me say this, because all the images you're seeing online is the UP and Delhi border. Let me tell you, this is the situation across the country. It's happening everywhere. Many people wanting to go back to their homes. They have no way to go. I know trains were sometimes stopped. People were just offloaded in Madhya Pradesh, a railway station. So it can't get more difficult than what we are seeing today in India. And you'll just literally probably have to pray at this point of time that things don't get as worse or as bad as we think it can, because that would mean that it's just a situation nobody can handle. We have been late by about 2.5 weeks. There's been no proper directions given. Certain state governments have done their bit pretty well, you must say. Even the Tamil Nadu government, with all its limitations, at least the corporations, I know Chennai definitely is doing a better job, but I hear some horror stories coming out of Coimbatore and that belt. So, as expected, it is still very haphazard, still very chaotic. At the same time, you have people trying to move. So we are actually in a state where we really don't know what exactly is going on. We really don't know. I think it's people in the health sector have been telling us, warning us really of horrific things, and I hope they're proven wrong. But from what we are seeing and what I'm hearing from my friends across, we are facing a huge humanitarian crisis. Let's not even get to the economics of what's happened. What the government has offered is not even a drop in the ocean. There's been no confidence building as far as the poor go. We have no cover, no money, nowhere to go, pretty much no food. Many of them can maybe last for another couple of days with some money that they have, after which we don't know what's going to happen. So it's in this scenario that we're having this conversation. So I just thought I'll put that out before beginning anything else. So, how does this go? Is it like a question answer? Do I just speak for a while just to get an idea? Sunita.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I on mute? No. Krishnaji, you should just talk to us about, the topic was music as resistance, and people will type in their questions and comments in the chat area, and we have moderator Ram who will pose the questions at the end.
Okay. So, music as resistance or art as resistance is sometimes being used a lot. It's always been used in the past. We always quote and poetry from the past. Kabir is a classic example of something we always speak about in terms of resistance, and he's today, in fact, I would complain, become the only name we keep calling out, and sometimes because of that subsumed many other names of resistance poetry in India. But when we talk about resistance in terms of it happening during its time, that's what I would like to talk about. Not reflective resistance, not resistance that is then taken at a different period of time and used in discourse, but during its period. And I think that's very important. And that's what I find very relevant today. We always find in all cultures, which is not India, that it is the voice of the marginalized, the voice from the marginalized, that has always been at the forefront of resistance: poetry, music, dance, theatre, drama, name it. And to a large extent because the conditionality of their lives makes it imperative that they use every tool possible to make the world listen to them. Whereas if you take culture and art that inhabits worlds that are of cultural privilege, you very rarely see resistance or serious resistance about the fundamentals of how those societies are built or those cultures are practiced. Very rarely. The questioning is probably more reactive at times, responsive to a situation, but it is not part of, shall I say, the artistic culture itself. Speaking of, say, for example, the art form that I practice, Carnatic music, and I don't want to use the word classical, it's a word that I do not like, and so I will not use that word. So the art form builds itself from the fact that it is beyond questioning. So the whole cultural basis of general cultural elite is that there is something fundamental about the way we live, the cultural elite live, that is unquestioned, that is of a status of sophistication, that is of a position of understanding, of nuance, of an ability of being in some fashion a more refined human being, which is automatically bestowed upon our cultural being. And therefore, the art that we practice or that we sing or that we dance is already imbued with that sensibility. And therefore, whether it is a learning process, whether it is practice, questioning remains at a very, very superficial level. You could ask technical doubts. You could ask questions about, how do I sing this? How don't I sing this? Those are very, very, very simple challenges that you go through. But beyond which, the fundamentals of the practice itself, fundamentals of the social construct, or what it says, for example, is very rarely taken up as a challenge. And in a way, I understand it because it is this moral high ground that these cultures automatically believe that they are actually sharing with larger society. To a large extent, these cultures and these art forms believe that the rest need to, shall we say, evolve to a state of being where they need to learn to appreciate the finer things of life. So I'm saying all this out there right in the beginning because it's important to understand the non-existence of questioning, to be very blunt, in this kind of music and this kind of culture. And it is also important to recognize the privilege of being able to even think in that fashion. I grew up thinking in that fashion. I grew up thinking that this was, after all, something far superior than, ethnic music or rural music or something that's raw, something that is unrefined. These are all words we throw very, very easily. And I won't say this word is as much used by the so-called progressives of the world as it is of anybody else. And I want to say this very, very loudly because what we don't realize is we keep discussing about caste and about these discriminative markers only in the sense of politics, health, education, and a very tactile mode. We never discuss it emotionally. We never discuss it in terms of how we feel. And I can tell you most of the progressives of the world will say the right things as far as talking about all these things in very tactile fashion. But then if you ask questions of aesthetics, questions of beauty, questions of color, simple things, and you will find ingrained in these sensibilities are certain privileged cultural notions of what is refinement, what is questioning. Therefore, I like to say that most of our houses in India are Fab India houses. For those who don't know what Fab India is now the supermarket of looking India. Put it very simply. So any house, any of our houses, I can show you my whole house. It's a Fab India house. Okay? It's a Fab India house. All our houses are Fab India houses. And we have now, almost created this color scheme for what is culture. India has a color scheme for culture. If I see a fluorescent green house, it's not culture. I mean, when you fly into many cities in India, I can definitely vouch for Chennai. When you fly down, you will see fluorescent pink, fluorescent orange houses. And I can tell you, I have thought to myself, the progressive that I am, saying, why would anybody paint their house that color? Now, I wonder, where is that coming from? Or where is that coming from? So, my own seeking towards these questions came, of course, from my art form, which I dearly love and dearly practice, because it was an art form that I never questioned. It was a representative culture. It is Indian culture, very bluntly put. It's the idea of Indian culture that I never challenged. I never thought it was important to challenge, because I really believe that this was what India shows as itself. And I must say, this is true of independent India. I'm talking independent India of 1947. Every government has done the same thing. Every government, irrespective of their political position, have displayed this so-called classical culture as Indian culture. Look at the institutions that the Indian, for what art forms were they created? They were created for upper caste celebrated art forms. Whether it's Kathakali, whether it's Bharatanatyam, whether it is Khayal music. So what I'm getting here is that fundamentally our culture is a casteist culture, controlled by upper caste niche notion of everything. And there has to be a very strong realization of that. Somebody has asked me, what is a turning point for me? I mean, I don't believe there was a specific moment, honestly. I sang this music. I loved this music, and I kept singing. I loved the applause, and everybody was very happy with me. I was making decent amount of money. Actually, the questioning for me began at a very internal level. You could even say very technical level. I was just curious about the history of this music. Simple curiosity, and it was musicological. It was not political or social at all. So I started looking into old treatises, from the Natya Shastra to all these, and said, okay, where does this word raga come from? What are these ragas? And I started digging these texts with the help of scholars, and I was trying to see, first of all, is there any connection between the music that we celebrate everything in India has to be 2,000 years old. So this is 2,000 years old. It came from some Sangeet Ratnakara texts, and we sing it like, it's a continuum. We love to believe in this continuum. So I was questioning this continuum. And I think the first thing that struck me is the notion of beauty, and about how time defines the notion of beauty, even within this art form. Let's not even go to the broader questions. What I considered extremely beautiful in this art form, aesthetically, is sound. When we tried doing some reconstruction of old notations, we said, that sounded awful. It really was awful. That's the only word I will use. And I was saying, okay, so where is this beauty coming from, which I think is eternal, which I think was carried forward from Tyagaraja? I mean, so is this something that is just a social construction by a group of people who believe in something that is beautiful? How does time play a role in this? So fundamental question for me came from beauty and from the notion of beauty. The moment these questions came up, I began asking questions of myself, my own notions of, I love this raga, but the raga did not sound this way. Were the people listening to the raga at that point of time unrefined? Were they people of not this sophistication? Is this what I call evolution? Is it evolution? And very soon social questions were being asked. Who's practicing this art form? Who's practicing which art form? When does an art form get its status of being representative of a larger body of people? These are all political questions. These are all cultural questions. And I think that was that period of time when I started then understanding the social and politicalness of aesthetics, of sound. That sound is political. That sound is discriminative. And so I was asking questions in my own practice, it was very challenging at one point, because I was saying, is what I think very beautiful and I believe gives me moments of great epiphany actually a discriminative idea that is actually not allowing somebody else to come in? How do these two things coexist? That was a challenge. The most beautiful experience for me be actually something that's oppressive and ugly for another person? And as a practitioner, how do I grapple with that? Do I say I stop singing tomorrow because this music does this to somebody? Or is there a possibility for a discourse in this? So that's, I think, where questions really began. But they were still limited. They were still limited to my own art form, to my own environment of culture. I think they expanded only when I started spending time personally as a person with different kinds of cultures from different sections of society, experiencing different notions of beauty, or trying to, I'm still saying trying to, and understand various ways of looking at sound, of art, of people. And then the question is, how can I create a conversation between these different ideas? How can we create a point, an intersection, or multiple intersections? And it's deeply problematic, these intersections. All we can do is create an intersection. What happens in the intersection, nobody can control. So, but how does one create intersections? By being sensitive, by always realizing that you don't know. Fundamental point is that you really don't know. Can you talk about the origin? Okay. What does a color scheme get its status? Why don't understand that fabric of the Well, in every question you ask me, there is the whole notion of upper caste Brahminical ideas. So the notion of, if you look at how we build many of these ideas of color, first of all, these colors by themselves belong to various communities, right? I mean, if you look at the paintings, they belong to multiple communities. I mean, these earthy colors don't belong to a community. But the question is, who builds the narrative of it being representative of culture? That's the question that we're asking. So many of the things that are taken from, whether it is paintings or textiles, or, for example, the indigo, famous Indian indigo, they have all been practiced by multiple communities belonging to different caste groups across the country. Now, the question we are asking is, or the question I am asking personally is, how does this become a whole? That's when it gets problematic. That's my point. Now, this homogeneous notion of beauty is created by the powerful cultural elite. And in India, the cultural elite is definitely determined to a large extent by caste formation. And caste formation determines the cultural elite. So, take handloom and khadi. I mean, with handloom and khadi, philosophically, is just the opposite. Philosophically, it's just the opposite. But how is the narrative built? So, for example, many of the people today who belong to marginalized sections wear polyester. Now, let's look at that. Okay? Most of the women are in their 90s. If you go to any village in India, especially in South India, or even the back streets, they are in 90s. Now, how am I going to view that culture vis-a-vis handloom khadi culture? We all know the answer to that. Whereas, while saying we are going back to our own roots, going back to our own textiles, we are also commenting on for people for whom simply said, this is cheaper. This is beauty. The fluorescent pink kaftan that a woman wears in the back street is beautiful for her. But we as elites have gone through the journey of the polyester, then decided that no, we need to go back to our roots, and then are creating a narrative that then twists the whole thing back in its head. The question is the control of this narrative, control of these notions. So many of these things will belong to many communities, but then when certain groups of people start controlling these narratives, that's when the problem becomes very, very important for us to address. You said sound is political. Okay. What an idea. But is it the narrative about sound that becomes political? Is it even possible to talk about sound itself? Well, I mean, when I say sound is political, I'm actually talking about the reception of sound, am I not? Sound by itself doesn't exist if you don't receive it. It's almost a philosophical question, but it is. So sound exists because we receive it. And the receiving of sound is never a clean slate. It's always layered with the person's being. And therefore, the weaving, the seeding system that receives the sound is processing the sound through the multiple layers that are already there in our being. Therefore, the politics is, in a way, being embedded into the sound by the individual and the collective. Depending on the power of the individual and the power of the collective, the politics is shifted. And I think that's why it's important. I mean, what can I do about it? This is always going to happen. This is not going to go away from me. But can I be supremely aware of this process? Let me give you an example. The day there is this art form, I've used this example before, and because that was an important moment for me, art form called Kuttu. Those who are not aware, it's either called Terukuttu or Katte Kuttu. There is this debate about that. I won't go into it. And the first time I heard it, I can tell you that what the person sang was noise. To me, it was noise. It was occasional tune singing, and for most part, noisy stuff. What was astonishing for me as a person is through a period of engagement with the art form, it became music. I never heard noise anymore. I could feel the emotion in all the parts that was noise to me. Because in some way, at least momentarily, I was able to remove these systems of politics and enter a different cultural sphere. I'm not saying it's permanent, at least momentarily. So noise becomes music. I mean, that's for me an astounding moment that something becomes music. And I psychologically think of them being as poles apart. But they are not poles apart. They exist so close to each other. And it's just a very narrow margin of things of when something can be music and when something can be noise. Or when something can be disturbing and when something can be beautiful. It's just that little thing. And that's what I meant when I said sound is political. I may miss a few questions. I'll come back to them, I promise.
Mr. Krishna, can you recognize the name of the person with the question?
Oh, I will. The last question was from Linda Hess. The next question is from Giri. The approach of exploring people's experiences, music in your personal journey is in many ways emancipatory. How do you see the approach you take in music in a larger context, just exploring knowledge systems, occupation? Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most important thing for me, actually, very honestly speaking. I feel it's very important that I'm grounded, that my discourse, what I say, is grounded in the specificity of what I inhabit, because that's where my learning is coming from. But a lot of the conversation is not specific to this. It's as relevant to larger questions. I mean, knowledge system is a word that you've used in your question. I would like to look at that. I mean, knowledge itself is almost an epistemological question of how knowledge is created. How is knowledge created? When is something knowledge and when is something not knowledge? When is something given sense of value and when something not? These become very important questions when you discuss any set of people, communities, access, talk about discrimination. All these become very important conversations. So, I mean, in the case of Carnatic music, if I speak specifically of communities, specifically of ideas of knowledge that are respected even within Carnatic music, let's not even go beyond. And when you grapple with this, you see that the strategies and the frameworks with which there is negation and there is discrimination are universal, irrespective of what culture we talk about. The systems by which human beings operate don't differ from any part of the world. We just use different systems, different semantics, different notions of culture to do exactly the same thing. And therefore, a very important aspect of my present book, for example, Sebastian and Son, which is about the Mridangam maker, is the idea of knowledge. Here is a community of people who have pretty much given to us the idea of what the Mridangam is, the instrument that accompanies every Carnatic recital and every Bharatanatyam recital. They themselves don't have a notion of their own knowledge. Let's start there. you know, and therefore there is the whole possibility of imagining what they do as being knowledge is itself being removed from their existence. Imagination of knowledge, imagination that you create a discourse with what we know, is itself not there. How does society create that? At the same time, you have people like me who are ready to appropriate that into our own discourse, into our own understandings, and into our own way of saying, this is how magnificent this is. So these two things are parallelly existing. And the ugliness of any discriminative system, the most ugly thing to me is not just the oppressive side, but the discriminative system makes the person who's oppressed a participant in that structure. And they have to be a participant in the structure for sheer existence. And therefore, these are questions that have to be taken to large. And I think that is why culture comes back into this, because we constantly only talk in terms of economics, but I think we should talk in terms of culture. We have to treat any discriminative system in terms of culture. I mean, I can problematize my own being. Me having this conversation itself at some point can be considered ridiculous. I've never faced discrimination in my life. I mean, any kind, starting from gender. I belong to, I have every form of it. I speak English. I speak kind of English that people in America will listen to. I'm an upcast. And so I think English. I mean, I think English is great privilege. So me having this discourse itself has to be problematized, fundamentally. And I have to problematize my own existence in this conversation. Where is the line between me saying I am participating in this conversation and, like a friend used this word, amplifying the voice, and where is the line from saying that I am actually not allowing somebody to speak? How do I navigate that? That's also something. This is as much you can again transfer this question to a man who's a feminist. You can just transpose the same kind of an argument into those kind of situations. So I'm saying that these are larger questions. These are applicable to any other framework that we want to look at. The next question is from SJ. While change is constant, everybody is resistant to it. Do you see somewhere down the line acceptance of hybrid forms of music with multiple influences as the norm? And in that case, what would be the new revolution? I mean, music has always been hybrid. There's no music which is not hybrid, first of all. There's no writing, there is no literature, there is no music, there's no dance, which is not fundamentally hybrid. The negation of hybridity is where power exists. When you negate the fact, or when you refuse to accept hybridity, or you position it as being an evolutionary process, is when the problem comes. Now, there are two ways I can look at your question. Is if you are talking in terms of, shall we say, fusion or collaborative music, which happens around the world, there are two things that trouble me about it. Let me just put out that. One is that collaborations to a large extent happen only within the bandwidth of certain privileges. So Hindustani and Carnatic musicians will collaborate. Okay? You will have a jazz quartet and something else collaborate. You will have Western classical musicians. So there is, even in this notion of, shall we say, collaborative structures, many other things that are being taken for granted. Why is it within this bandwidth? Vertical collaborations are interesting. When I say vertical, I'm just using a societal norm, not that I believe in its structure. Are there vertical collaborations? Let me look at India. Are there vertical collaborations? Or you have some very ugly representations. For example, I don't know how many of you have seen the Manganiyar's famous production where people the Manganiyars sit in boxes. I don't know, this is done by a French somebody, I don't know. I see it as obscene and absolutely gross and very disrespectful. So either you have it being art of the people who don't belong to privilege being taken up to be some kind of a showpiece of show of ethnicity, or you have collaborations within certain bands. The problematic part is how do we create conversations that will be looking at vertical discriminative practice. As somebody who's tried a few, I can say that they are not clean. Um, there is a problem with it fundamentally, because one is how are you as a participant looking at the collaboration is one. How is the viewer receiving it is also the second. All I can say is if we can create collaborative art productions that don't just give us a feel-good feel, that actually leave us with questions, even disturbs us. Art need not be a pretty thing. We always think of art as being pretty. The most beautiful art is not pretty. And I'm using pretty in a specific sense here. So if we can actually make these collaborations, shall we say, not looking at making something beautiful and pretty, but actually engaging with, being a robust engagement, which is difficult, which has unanswered places, which is reflective of what we are as people, then I think we can move into a space that is very rarely explored. There are exceptions, of course, I'm keeping them aside. That I think is more interesting than this is the revolution that I will talk about. If you ask me, there should be a revolution, I'll say this would be a revolution. Be a very interesting revolution. Because, let's first burst this bubble by art, is that fact that art by itself does anything in society. Bluntly put, art does nothing. By itself does nothing. So let's not, we always think that art and artists somehow by their very existence and doing what they do will be influencing society. No, I don't believe that's true. Art is a homogeneous den by itself. All art forms are homogeneous dens. Unless there is disturbance, they're not going to do anything. So if we can create multiple disturbances in the positive sense, then I think we can see some movement. There's a comment from Aravinda, nothing more political than a tree falling. Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more than that. Mridu Shekhar. So the producer of the sound has no control over how it is received. Very good question. The producer does not have control. But the producer can't be blind to the fact that it's going to be received in different ways. That's an escapism for me. I could very clearly say, I sing what I sing, and if people are celebrating it as some emblem of Brahminism, what can I do? I don't see it that way. Sorry, that's not unacceptable for me. I think the producer of the art knows very well that there are multiple ways of reception. And I think the producer of the art needs to be constantly aware of multiple ways of reception. You can't control it, but you can be aware of it, which means it may actually change the way you do art. Because you yourself perceive and receive things differently at different times, depending on your own reflectiveness and your own engagement with it. Therefore, while we don't have control over that, we certainly are aware of it. We certainly know what we are feeding into. I know every time I sing in certain spaces what my presence means there, even before I've uttered one single note. You don't have to utter a note. You enter a space, you look at yourself, you look around, you know what the environment is looking for. That we have to be very, very aware. How do you suggest, this is from Pavan, how do you suggest we practice allyship in our own daily privileged lives? What challenges have we faced on this journey in the last few years from all strata of society, so-called upper and lower castes? Well, I think the most important thing for me has always been is to be constantly aware of my own privileges in everything that I do, and everything that I say, and everything that I sing, and everything that I write. I think that is the first starting point. It doesn't mean that I've not made mistakes. I'm not going to make mistakes. I am still making mistakes. I am still saying the wrong things, singing the wrong song, doing all that. But the only thing I can suggest is that, because that has changed very little things in my life, that small things in your house, how you speak to people. And there's an example of late I've been telling people from the book Sebastian and Sons, and I'll narrate it's a very simple thing, and I think, but those are important moments, is, for example, most Indian languages have I will say Ninga if you're older. I will say Ni if you're a colleague or my own age group or dear friend. I realized that every Mridangam player in my interviews was addressing every Mridangam maker, irrespective of whether they were dead or alive or different generation, with Ni. Every Mridangam maker always addressed the Mridangam player with Ninga, irrespective of their age too. And I found that very interesting, that this was completely caste-based. It's got nothing to do with age. It's the Brahmin and it's the Dalit. It's very clearly being played out. And I do exactly the same thing. I don't do anything different. I was addressing somebody who's been in our home for the last 30 years as me. He's 25, 20 years older than me. I was doing exactly the same thing. So I'm just giving a very small example simply because I think these are where we learn. These are where we can be, that's why we need to be always aware of it, is what I'm saying. We need to always talking about it. And in discussions, when, with different art forms, with artists of different spheres, of different cultural backgrounds, different caste backgrounds, well, listening is the most important thing. Being able to listen changes so many things. My notion of knowledge changed because a Kuta artist said something to me one day. He spoke about knowledge, and again, to bring that example. A very senior artist, Rajagopal, very casual conversation one afternoon. He said, what I do is labor. He said it very casually. And he's a senior artist who performs it for nights for decades. And he said, what I do is labor. I have never called my art, my practice, labor. I always call it knowledge, wisdom. And he called his work labor. And I luckily listened to that little word that he used. So I think most of us in privilege do not listen. I'm not saying I listen more. I'm trying to learn still, I promise. But we do not listen. Even when we listen, we are actually listening to what our mind is saying. And this I learned from music when I taught my students. And when I teach my students in a classroom, one line of music, many times they don't get it for 20 minutes. And after 20 minutes, I'll call the students, say, can you shut your brain and listen to me? Because for 20 minutes, my student was listening to her own voice, repeating what I was singing in her head. So she was not listening to me, she was listening to herself. Or he was listening to himself. That's what we do. That's how we have conversations, and we call them conversations. We are talking to ourselves most of the times, especially if the other person does not have the power that we have. We are definitely only listening to ourselves. So the next one. Okay. I've watched Hindu audiences listening in rapture to Pandit Jasraj sing Allah, which is not an exception. Similarly, Jesudas has included Carnatic pieces in his folklore. Why have you singled out to be disinvited from singing? Okay, so the question is, why was I singled out while you have Jasraj singing about Allah and Yesudas singing? I think he meant Hindu pieces in the Hindu temple. Okay, this is again a problem of us not listening. So, when Jasraj sings Allah, what does it represent? And what I say may be disturbing, but I want just listen to it. What does it represent? It represents the Catholicity of Hindu culture. It represents the openness of the Indian civilization. I'm using all the lines that we love to hear. It shows that, it doesn't matter that he's Hindu. We embrace the Muslim. What? When Yesudas sings Hindu, what does it represent?
Excuse me, Krishnaji, I meant Jasuda singing pieces to Christ here.
Oh, Christ you're talking about. Thank you, okay.
I forgot to include that. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay. Now I'll come back to that, but I can speak about him singing Hindu too, and then I'll come to the Christ part. Okay, when Jesudas sings Hindu songs, it is seen as, again, the fact that there is an underlying notion as far as India is concerned. There's an underlying Hindu-ness that needs to be accepted by everybody. There's no question of negating that. There can't be a negation of this underlying notion of the Hindus. You accept that, and then everything can be built on top. The Islam can be built on it, the Christianity can be built on it, everything can be built. In Yesudas, there is an acceptance or a perceived acceptance of the Hindu-ness of himself. As long as that is already there, then him singing Christ is not the problem. Now, the problem with somebody like me is I am seen as an Brahmin from the inner sanctum sanctorum of the temple who's saying, I don't believe in this nonsense. By the way, I have never said, the interesting part is I've never said whether I'm a theist or an atheist to anybody in the world. Everybody's already presumed this in their own heads. And I don't plan to ever address that. But the point is, I am seen as actually somebody from the inner quarter who, in his initial days of performance, wore a namam in his head, showed off his Brahminness, showed off his culturalness, showed off his religiosity, who's now speaking a language which in people's ears seems to be asking very difficult questions of all that is accepted in upper caste notions of the Hindu. Which is why I'm a problem. Because I am asking a fundamental question of saying, suppose I don't believe in this fundamental framework of what we consider that is Hindu, which itself needs challenging, in my opinion. Then, if Yesudas said he didn't believe in Hindu, if he said I'm a devout Christian who doesn't believe in one Hindu God, do you think he'll be invited to any Hindu temple to sing? No way. So there is an understanding of acceptance. He after all learned from Sarmagudi Srinivas. So there are these perceived and messaging systems that many times govern how you see an individual or the collective. When Muslims, Nadaswaram Vidwans play Carnatic music, it is seen as a great thing. See, they accept Indian culture. So it is in these crevices and these nuances where we operate. And that's why we can't just keep looking at it as black and white. It is in these gaps, and somewhere these gaps at times burn. Okay, how Neha Krishnamachari, how can younger musicians in the US do their part to open up the Carnatic space to conversations that engage our problematic track record in caste, class, and controversies that riddle Carnatic music? Example, Me Too. Well, starting from Me Too. Well, first of all, Carnatic music was one of the few worlds of culture in India where actually Me Too was even discussed. So I don't even know whether that's a badge of honor considering what happened in the rest of India. But I think, let me start with Me Too and then proceed. I think the one thing that we can really hope for is to I think what the younger people should do is to have little collectives with more conversations. I think it is in the smaller groups, it is in the smaller safe places where important conversations can happen, especially with issues like Me Too, which are, fundamentally knocking at the patriarchal bulwark that allows these cultures to function. So what I would encourage younger people in the United States who are engaging with music or Carnatic music, any art form, is to try and create smaller groups where you can engage in these conversations, where you feel people feel safe to come and talk. I think that's the best way forward. I would tell you, don't try. I know you're going to be probably fighting with your aunts and uncles and fathers and mothers, but I would rather say, yeah, have those battles, do that. But I think it's more important that you speak to people of your own age. Because there's something that is happening in India today that we are not recognizing, that we have these very notions being spread across the younger generation also. There are a large group of, especially in socially mobile caste groups and in upper caste groups, very, very deep-seated casteist, patriarchal notions being spread through the multiple social media machineries that we have at work at play today. So I would say, and I won't be surprised if the similar thing is happening in the United States too, because there is enough money being put here. Some of you may have grown up in an environment like that, but your worldview is expanded because of your experiences. But you should remember there are a lot of people for whom these deep-seated notions still remain inside. So I would encourage you to talk to these younger people. You have to speak to these younger people, because I think that's where the future depends on. As much I would say younger people in this country should be doing that. And this cuts across the country, because we're having this problem across the country. It's not just a Carnatic music or Bharatanatyam issue or anything. It's an upper caste cultural issue that we need. I think we need to engage with it. In fact, I would say that even after my generation, there's been a failure. We never even thought about these things. We failed. That's the truth. I would rather say the next generation, I'm far more hopeful of the next generation, because at least they're willing to engage with this problematizing. So that's what I would say. Please speak about caste. We have to talk caste with the knowledge that many of us know goddamn shit about it. We have no idea about it. And let's start from there. Because I always find it amazing when I come to the United States, when I speak to expat Indians, on how they will be most comfortable talking about the African American problem, talking about the Hispanic problem, talking about the feminism. All that's fine. You just shift that frame and bring the word caste there, and everything crumbles. And the only thing they can talk to you about is about how the reservation system pushed them to come to America. And none of these people are living with begging bowls, by the way. They probably have $1 million home, most of them. And it astonishes me on what a big blind spot caste is, especially in so many houses in North America. So speak to their children, speak to their nephews, their nieces, because there are many who have not engaged in caste in their houses. And there's enough you can read. There's enough available that we can all read to understand. Balaji Narasimhan, could you comment on Indian film music, contemporary as well as 60s? Have things gotten better or worse or remain the same? Now, that's a kind of a dangerous question. When you say better or worse, what do you mean? You like it better? Is that a aesthetic judgment? So I don't know.
I meant in the context of the political perspective.
Okay, so got it. Society and politics. Yeah. So I think first of all, it's very difficult to put Indian film music in one basket is impossible. It functions. Each film industry functions very different. So it's difficult to give you a generalized comment. But let me say a few things about Hindi and maybe Tamil. I think the Dravidian movement is a very important aspect of Tamil cinema. Those who don't know the history of Tamil cinema and Dravidian movement, cinema was the vehicle for the Dravidian movement. It was the vehicle for political change. So right from Annadurai, they were writing in films. So the fact that film became a vehicle for social change, social questioning, coming from, of course, Periyar's thought processes, itself made that the sounds of the music also started shifting. It's a fascinating. You understand one thing about film music is that it's to me, the most interesting art genre because it doesn't have one form. Film music is fundamentally based on storytelling. It's based on stories, context, time, and people handling it. Now, because all this is always has been largely dynamic, music is always changing. So there's no one. I can't actually give you a static framework for film music, except saying it's based on the movie, which is what makes it fascinating. Which meant that right through the Dravidian movement, the political shift, the sound of film music kept shifting. It kept moving, which is extremely interesting to watch. Now, having said that, you had certain markers that never moved. And some of the markers that intrigue me, and I'll just put it out there, I'll give you a classic case. Now, if there was a film being made at any period of time, 1920 to 2020, which has a largely Hindu religious overtone, suppose the sound of the music will be classical based. It's a very interesting aesthetic acceptance, irrespective of who the music director is. The notion that something of a religious context, of divinity, is close to the notion of the classical is a connectivity which has never been shaken. This is true as much of Bollywood. There it may be closer to the Hindustani sounds. Here it will be closer to the Carnatic sounds. So I'm just putting this because it's a very interesting thing that has remained constant, irrespective of the fact that you had people from different other socially mobile caste groups also. But what is fascinating about Tamil cinema now is two parallel things. One is the emergence of many Dalit filmmakers. I think, in fact, I would believe Tamil cinema is going through an incredible phase where robust social and political questions are being asked. Any of you who have not seen the movie called Pariyerum Perumal, you have subtitles. Pariyerum Perumal, it's on Amazon Prime. The subtitles, Pariyerum Perumal, watch it. I think Tamil cinema is going through a very important phase where the sound is also again shifting. You're finding far more robust use of art forms and instruments that belong to the Dalit community in storytelling. So that's a very, very strong movement that is happening, which is important, I think, in Tamil cinema. At the same time, you also find one other, I think a shift is happening, but it's not yet happened. Something that happened in the 90s was very interesting with Rahman is that the voices became more and more only the classical voices. Many of the singers who sang for Rahman in that period were the Carnatic trained voices. It's an interesting shift that happened to the extent that all the big names of Tamil cinema singing became pretty much Palagat or Tamil Brahmin. They may have grown up in Bombay, that's the only difference. But that is also these are just interesting observations. But in Bollywood, you don't see such a strong Dalit discourse at all. No, you don't have a strong Dalit discourse. It is still you have a Dalit discourse coming out of the voice of people who are socially caste-wise privileged or are politically mobile. So the Dalit discourse that is so strong in Marathi film, Marathi theatre, which is just the neighboring linguistic sound, is not found in Bollywood cinema. So that's also something that we need to keep in mind. Okay. Next question is from Vijaya Nagarajan. I loved your Porambok song about the commons. Can you share with us the history of the song and if there's a tradition of folk music songs about Porambok? Okay. So Porambok is, first of all, in English means the commons. The history of the song is basically simple. I mean, I was looking at that point of time for different kinds of text which I could include in my Carnatic repertoire. And I was specifically looking at texts that did not belong to the cultural bandwidth of the Brahmin. And I was also wondering whether, how do we bring it in? It's not just a political point, but it's also an aesthetic question. Very soon I realized that it's not just about the themes. In language, many times, for example, if I was thinking in terms of caste, I'll think of Brahminical themes. I'll say, what are the themes that are not Brahminical? But what I didn't realize, it's not just the theme, but it's also the dialect. For example, for a Tamilian, saying Parvati is comfortable. Saying Mariata is not comfortable. Now, Mariata is not Parvati. Is she Parvati? That can be debated. Now, has she been subsumed into the Hindu, upper Brahminical Hindu notion of Parvati? I'm not getting into those nuances. But I can tell you, I'll be far more comfortable singing Parvati than singing Mariata, even if I think Mariata is Parvati in my head. So it's interesting how dialect is also a marker, a social marker. So singing about Rama from a Brahminical voice is different from singing about Rama from a non-Brahminical voice. So Rama's image shifts, right? So this is something I stumbled upon in this matter of conversations. Just about that time, this suburb of Ennore, which is north of Chennai, there are about 3 or 4 power plants there. They've created havoc to the environment over there. A river called Talayar is pretty much an oil dump. Marshlands have been taken over. There's fly ash everywhere. It's actually an environmental disaster site. It should be declared that. Of course, there are people, fisher folks' lives who have been affected. And my dear friend Nityanand Jairam, we do a lot of cultural work together and environmental and social work together. He said, there's this song on Porambok, on Commons, but it's directly also talking about Ennore. You're looking for new songs. Can you do something about this? And, when I saw the song, it was in the language that I would hear in the streets of Chennai. It's the language of Tamil that the auto driver will speak to me, the slang that the auto driver will use to me when I get into the auto. And I was like, wow, how will this sound in Raga Kamboji? How will this sound in Raga Todi, for example? Psychologically, I can go back to the aesthetics. Saying Porambokku and Todi somehow don't seem like they're like two things I should utter together. They seem like they're two different words, right? So I gave it to a friend to compose, and we sat together one day and we tuned it. To my amazement, it worked. It worked aesthetically, not just politically. It worked aesthetically. And that was an important moment in my own musical journey, saying, it is possible to bring different kinds of sounds of language. Language in its sound itself determines where it's placed in society. Words in their sound determine whether they are to be respected or not. And it's fascinating how we as a species navigate that on an everyday basis in a very instinctive manner that we don't even realize how we do it. That's how Porambokku came to be.
Mr. Krishna, there are lots of questions, I think, remaining. I wanted to see if we can if you can talk a little bit about where you think the protest movement is in terms of citizenship laws, your perspective. You've been all over India participating in some of these. We don't know what the latest is. We hear about NPR being postponed indefinitely, but in general, where do you think this whole citizenship initiatives are heading? Any suggestions and what we can do as NRIs to?
Absolutely. Well, right now, of course, everything is on a stall, on a pause because of the coronavirus epidemic. Most of the protest sites are today dormant, if I may say. They are not closed. There has been an attempt by the government in Delhi to paint over all the graffiti and the paintings that were on the walls in Shaheen Bagh in Delhi. In order to I can't even believe that amidst Corona, they had time to send painters with white paint. Very important signs of protest. Something very violent about just that act, in my opinion. I've also been to the protest in Chennai, a few other places. So honestly speaking, yes, we do hear that NPR and CA right now will not be spoken about for sure for some time till we try and tide over this crisis. But I won't be surprised if it comes back, if not now, in a year or two, when there needs to be political capital again proved by using. Now, where were these protests going? And I think, honestly, that was the struggling question for many of us, is where did they move from here? Because they were robust and, must say, give all these women incredible credit for holding it together for so many weeks and months together. But the question was, how do we take that forward? How does that become a larger pressure point? And it did, I mean, to a large extent, the truth is, it did not become to the extent that it could have become. And I think there were multiple reasons. One is definitely a lack of any strong political will among the political establishment in the opposition. Is definitely one of the problems that was faced in the movement. That there was no political outfit capable of capitalizing on what was very clearly a great amount of anger and sadness and violence. That there was not an individual. I'm not even talking in terms of individuals. I'm talking in terms of collectives. And there was not even an effort to come together as collectives. I mean, they did this so-called protest march or walk in a few places, but there was no real way of coming together and supporting these things overtly. So what I really believe we need to do, and I think is actually mount pressure on the opposition parties. We need to mount pressure on the opposition parties, find ways by which because they can amplify this. Even in Tamil Nadu, the parties like the DMK did nothing. It's the truth. And there was a great opportunity here. They did nothing. And I think the fact is that there's no energy, there's no creativity, there is absolutely a lack of imagination among the political establishment in the opposition. And that is the greatest struggle for these movements, these social movements and political movements in our country. How do we galvanize this? So I'm saying we need, I think, external pressure from external governments are a very important. We need to create more pressure from external governments and external. I think that did help to some extent in the CA bit. To some extent it did, but we need to mount much more of that. Definitely. So I think, as far as people who don't live in India, I think one is, of course, there were enough protests I know happening in different parts of America too, but I think, can there be political pressure? Can there be more robust voices, condemnations, which is unconditional coming from across the globe? Because if there's one thing that this government is terribly scared about, and if that's the only thing that the government is scared about, it's image. That's the only thing that I see Mr. Narendra Modi's government being iffy about, which is image. And I think that's where international pressure can come. At the same time, we need to collectively, both whether you're in the States or whether you're in India, find ways of getting regional parties at a state level to come together and apply pressure using these social groups. It has not happened to the extent that it could have happened. And that is, it worries me, because if it all, say for example, 1 year later, 8 months later, we have the Shaheen Baghs of India opening up. The question again happens, okay, where do we go from? The sad part also here is, Raju, is that we have the courts that are entirely compromised. We have a Supreme Court that's not even willing to listen to petitions. So in a way, we have our hands tied on many fronts. We have a media, and I'm talking about especially Hindi media, and we watch English media. English media is irrelevant. Let's be very clear. Hindi media is the most relevant media in this country. Completely sold out. I mean, it's a joke. I mean, if you look at any of these channels, it's scary. It's literally scary, the kind of things that are being done. And so you have a media that is so compromised. You have a justice system that is so compromised. We are really up against the wall. This is the truth. We are up against the wall. And unfortunately, you have a wonderful government in the United States too. So therefore, thank you very much for that. But I think we have to still find ways of, I think image is something we should continue to use. We should continue to bombard on image. At the same time, we have to work with political parties. It's important that we work with political parties because we have to bring them together at least at local state levels. Because I think that's the future of India. The future of India is in the possibility of federalism. It's not anywhere else. And I don't see it anywhere else, at least today. Okay, there are tons of questions. I don't know how many I can answer.
Krishna ji, just can you hear me, everyone?
Yes, I can hear.
Chime in with a timekeeping question. Are we okay to go until 10 in India?
20 minutes. That's good.
Yeah, and maybe you can just pick the questions that resonate most with you and say anything you would want to share with us.
There's many questions about that. Okay, for those whose questions I do not answer, I apologize. I promise that I'll come back to them at some point in time. How do you politicize your own pedagogy? How do you teach Carnatic music in explicitly political ways to fundamentally change the sounds and practice of classical music? I think it's a very interesting question from Usha. That's still, I'm still learning that. I won't say that I've figured that out entirely, but it's a very important question about pedagogy and about learning and about how do I disseminate, share this with my students. I think the only thing that I definitely do is make sure that the classroom is a debating ground. Nothing is accepted because I'm saying it or because I'm singing it, for example. That's the best thing I can do in the classroom, and therefore. I was not like this before. I was a man, pretty much had a stick in my hand. You had to take what I said and sing what I sing. But I'm saying this because that's a fundamental shift that has happened to me, that the classroom then becomes entirely debating. Of course, I'm not saying it's utopianly democratic. It is not. At the same time, it is a place where very difficult questions are asked. A classic example was recently, I don't know, people have got this place called Heggodu in Karnataka. Subarna, very famous theatre person, created a whole theatre movement with the villagers there. It's an incredible movement, and they do this retreat every year. And this time, I've been there more than once speaking. This time, it was an interesting presentation with my students. And what happened on stage was fascinating. Two of my students started fighting with me on the stage in front of an audience of 200 people. We had this huge argument. And I think I came out of saying, if we can do that, then maybe then we're not sticking to a pedagogy. Maybe the fundamental thing is pedagogy itself needs to be fluid. Other than the fundamentals of technique and learning the grammar, keep that aside. I think pedagogy itself then becomes a fluid thing, and then sounds change. A very important thing is also who's participating in every one of these cultures. Culture is largely a homogeneous sphere. The challenge to us is, can we make it completely diverse? It can never be completely diverse, but can we make it bring different voices into different kinds of cultures? If so, what kind of environments are we creating? People always ask me, you say so much, are you teaching 15 Dalit students? It's a question I get asked many times. My question is, first of all, to presume that because I say all this, I don't exude caste power is first of all erroneous. Just because I say all this, do you think a Dalit person who loves music would find it very comfortable to walk into my house? No. And thirdly, even if I was teaching, if I was going to parade them as some kind of trophy to prove that I am casteless, that's even more disgusting. Right? So I'm just putting this out because there is both sides to this. So how does one really go about this? So when you say we want diverse voices, what do we mean by that? In every field we talk about this. What do we mean by saying we have a welcoming environment? Is the welcoming environment being questioning of ourselves? Is the welcoming environment only saying become like me to be part of this environment? So these are the things I think we have to ask in our classrooms. Even if they are homogeneous, we have to ask those questions. And then maybe we can do something. Okay. The Guru Shishya. Once again, I just quickly scroll. Give me a second, please. Okay, I'm going to take this next question from Tom. You mentioned patriarchy. You know music is deeply entrenched in patriarchy. You've worked with transgender communities and their art form. From one perspective, transgender is an immense resistance to patriarchy. You see their music reflecting this potential. Okay, the community that I specifically worked with among the transgender community is the Jogapa community. The Jogapas are musicians, devotional musicians. Usually states of India. Now, they are a very traditional community. Transgender community, let's not think it as just a queer movement. There's a large section of transgender communities who are also very traditional and patriarchal there. So let's not forget that.
Yeah, I don't know if we lost TM, but he seems to be still speaking.
He's lost. Is he speaking? I don't see him anymore in the call.
I saw him. Yeah. So let me type a message.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Good. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, I was muted. Sorry. So just to complete that question, so their music was devotional music. So I think there was some patriarchy definitely in the culture also. At the same time, they inhabit a space that is very fluid in terms of sexuality, in terms of body and everything. So there is also these challenges of patriarchy that they are facing. But whether it's being identified as patriarchy is of course a different thing, right? Therefore, it is, I think, a very interesting, important, sometimes problematic negotiation between coming from tradition bound, which has its very various patriarchal constructions, but also but having a lived experience, which is deeply problematic because of the patriarchy. So I think there is probably some amount of conflict there, not a clear resolution, and probably we're not be looking for that kind of resolution. And I somehow think that that's there in the Jogapa community, at least to my observation. I lost the questions that came, so some of you may need to type it back in if you don't mind. I lost some of the questions. There was a question from Nikhil, which I was thinking of addressing, something about Me Too, something. I missed it. I don't know if he's still in the call.
This is Sunita. I'll read his question. Nikhil said,
yeah, can you read it out? Yes.
Yeah. Yes. The Guru-Shishya relationship is something which is integral to many Indian art forms, but as we have seen through the Me Too movement, there are also darker aspects of this reverence and divine status that is accorded to the Guru. How do you work to de-Brahmanize and make the Guru-Shishya relationship more equitable and accountable?
Okay. Yes, the Guru-Shishya relationship is a power relationship, without any doubt. Has it ever been a pristine relationship is anybody's guess. I really don't know whether there was any point when it was truly an equitable relationship. Will the Guru-Shishya relationship ever be equitable? I really don't know that too. Whether equitable is possibility in such kind of relationship, I don't know. But I think that the problem probably is also about how we look at the art form or these art forms itself. Because a lot of the power that the guru is getting is from the idea of what the guru is practicing and representing. Now, if the guru was a hip hop artist, then automatically somehow there is a certain perception of democracy that comes in. Because the art form, the practitioner, builds a culture that is very different. But if you're talking about art forms like, say, whatever, Hindustani music, Kathak, or Western classical music for that matter, I mean, everything. I mean, it's the same Brahminical patriarchy, you call it white patriarchy. It's the same thing. So, but if you build a system of culture or art that itself elevates its own position in society, then those practicing that are automatically accorded an almost otherworldly kind of power. And so the only way we can address, I think, one of the most important ways, I think this goes back to the other question from Neha too, is that one of the ways we can address these issues of Me Too and this inequality, if we robustly address that the art form itself needs reimagination. That these cultures require reimagination, require new life, require very deep questioning. If you bring these cultural systems to terra firma, so to speak, then the gurus will come to some extent to terra firma. If you say, I want the gurus to behave themselves, be democratic and equitable, but I consider the art form to be unquestioned divinity, it's not going to happen. So I think the answer to this lies to a large extent of asking fundamental questions of what this teacher is practicing. And this, like I said, extends to everything, Western classical music as much. It's white, upper class music in its own structural being. It applies to every kind of cultural power that is displayed across the world. Where do you see the protests going in light of Corona, especially as it sits here? I think this from SJ. Cull the less affluent strata. Okay, 1 second. Seems to be setting up to cull the less affluent strata of society who would be most affected. Well, I still have faith in the protests, I must say, as of today. Because what I saw in Delhi, what I saw in Chennai, what I saw in many places was overwhelmingly beautiful, overwhelmingly positive. There was nothing negative about any of the protests. And that was the most beautiful thing. And it was, Corona is going to affect many of the women who sat there day in, day out, who sat in Manarapeta in Chennai. But at the same time, I have faith from what I saw. I also saw the ghastly sights in Delhi. I went to the places where the mobs had attacked about a week after the riots in Delhi. It is horrific what I saw. I spent a morning there. And the way the government, every part of the machinery, the police were all part of what was very obviously a targeted attack on the community. That was, of course, riot instigating and allowed for a chain of things to happen and flow and abated for a long time. It was horrible. And it's definitely cut the community. The sharp lines that have been drawn there was evident even when I was there. I remember going into one of the centers, I think that was Harsh Mandar's support groups, and there was a guy in a scooter who whizzed past us and said, "Why are you going here? Go to the Hindu section. Check it out there." And therefore, relationships have been affected. Many houses were locked. There were houses outside which I will never forget. There was houses where they had stuck a white piece of paper and said, "Jai Shri Ram," and just stuck it out of their home, just so that the rioters knew it was a Hindu house. If there was no other, if there was, some other Hindu marker, there was nothing pasted. If there was no Hindu marker, it was Jai Shri Ram pasted. So I saw that too, and I can tell you, having been to many of these protests were very, very peaceful. These protests were about song, were about asking tough questions, but also about collectivity. And I therefore have faith that the protests will be back. What I don't know about is how can we take them forward. I don't want to call it the end game, as many people are writing in columns. That's not the word I would use. But how does one take this forward? That's a very tough one. I don't think we have any clarity on that yet. Any other question I missed? I have lost the whole question. So,
since we only have a few minutes left, maybe we can end on a similar note to what you were just talking about, because all of us are either on lockdown in our homes, or some of us, like the doctors and other essential service providers, are actually going out of our homes and performing seva and service that is keeping the rest of us safe in our homes. And so if you have a message for, and we're all here because we care about justice and an inclusive, equitable society world. So if you can help us close up with something that can keep us together and whole and forward thinking in this crazy, bizarre, scary moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know whether I have the right words to make us all feel better at this moment. Maybe we should not. Maybe we should not feel better.
Yeah.
Maybe we can go back not feeling good.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good feeling to hold. I think the very fact that all of us are sitting at home is something that should bother us. It should deeply disturb every one of us that we are sitting here to a webinar here and have this conversation. While there are hundreds of people, service providers who are trying to get this thing under control under great, great difficulties and circumstances. And in countries like India and America, the homeless, the people who don't have food, who are sometimes just sitting in a railway station, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go. And the thing I think we should think about very deeply, that's something that's bothering me, is that why are we talking about all this only when there is crisis? Why are we not talking about these things when there's no such crisis? And I'm talking about people like you and me, people like all of us. And when I say talking about it, I'm not talking about writing a column. We all write columns. We love to see our own words and hear our own voice. But I'm saying doing something, doing the work that needs to be done. We have no systems in place. I'm not saying that any system could have handled this situation. No, but the fact is, Chennai saw the floods. We've seen a situation that's much less than what we're seeing today, but we saw it. But I think that's something that we should keep in our mind after we type this. That we have no way, we are actually disconnected with reality. That's the truth. That many of us are, as people, as human beings, not intellectually in an understanding, emotionally as cultural people, disconnected with the realities. And that seva is not an offering that we do in a calamity. Seva is something that we're doing actually for our own better understanding of man. And I hope that we can keep that in mind and go be troubled every day that we're only talking about this, or we're only writing about this today. Or that what can we do that happens much more, much beyond these moments of crisis. Because I find myself doing exactly the same. There's a crisis, then I'm making the calls. I'm calling this person, saying, can this person produce, send this to this person. Yeah, all that's fine. That's reaction. We have to do it. But then, after which, every conversation we've had today, whether it's about class, about caste, about gender, is all entangled in our present moment. Because everybody being treated across the world are also being treated based on all these things. On who they are, where they go. Are they walking the road? I'll tell you a simple thing. I could take the car yesterday and I drove 5 kilometers. Not one policeman stopped me. But I know the bikes are being beaten up in my own city. 1,200 cases have been filed in the city of Chennai as of day before yesterday for people taking out their bikes. A friend of mine who's an artist living in North Chennai told me that guys, the Police have seized bikes because young fellows took it. They've been beaten up. The bikes, no case is going to be registered until the 15th of July. That's never going to happen to me. No police guy is going to stop my Jeep on the road and tell me, boss, I'm confiscating your car, walk back home. So let's keep all this in mind beyond this moment. Because even in this moment, we are not equal. That's the tragedy where we are.
Thank you for troubling us and making sure we don't feel good.
Thank you all for coming and asking these important questions. I truly appreciate it.
And I don't think any of us felt good when we joined today. I think the people who have gathered here on this webinar are concerned individuals around the world who are going to do everything we can to make a difference in our lives. I really think so. And by touching on all of these connected issues, caste plus, gender, art, music, politics, inclusion, privilege, protest, you have invigorated our dedication to making this world a better place, and I thank you for that. And what you've done is show us that you're open to being one of us as opposed to a person who has privilege and who is aloof from all of us, and I really appreciate that. From Hindus for Human Rights, I promise that we'll try and collect the questions that were not answered and get them to Krishnaji.
Oh, that'd be great. Please do that. Sure.
That.
Sure. I'll try and send maybe audio bites with answers. That's easier.
Great. And all of you can email info@hindusforhumanrights.org if you want to and send the question, or we'll find it on the Zoom call. And two last announcements before we part ways for the night. Krishnaji is doing a solo online concert tomorrow, shut-in concert. It's to raise money for artists in India who are unable to make ends meet during this coronavirus crisis because all the shows have been cancelled. So I have my ticket, and I hope all of you will also go and attend this concert. It'll be Krishnaji singing, so why wouldn't you? And you can find info on the Twitter, on Krishnaji's Twitter. And then if you will also go to our Hindus for Human Rights Twitter, it's at Hindus, the number 4HR. We have launched a fundraiser, an appeal for our friend Ajay Kumar in Kerala, who has an organization called Rights, which is supporting the most hard-hit families, Dalit and Adivasi families in Kerala